This is part 7 of the series of sulfur and your microbiome health. And in part 6, I got a little bit deeply into the differences between a sulfite allergy, a sulfonamide or sulfa drug allergy, and a sulfur intolerance. So now I really want to focus on the sulfur intolerance piece. Let me just recap and say you cannot be allergic to sulfur because sulfur is essential to life. And without a daily sulfur intake, you couldn't live. This means that an allergy to sulfur is not possible. There are very rare cases where there can be a severe genetic defect at birth, and this defect is in the sulfite oxidase enzyme. This child will not survive. They'll not leave the hospital. The need for sulfur cycling in the body is that great. So even if you've had one of those genetic panels and you find that you have a single nucleotide polymorphism or a SNP, and that impacts the sulfur pathways, these SNPs cannot affect you to the degree that you won't tolerate sulfur, because if you don't get your daily requirement of sulfur, you cannot survive. Okay, so under the heading of sulfur intolerance. Sulfur intolerance is a temporary response to the upregulation of sulfur deficiency in the body. Some people experience that as headaches, flushing, nausea, or fatigue, all very normal. And all of these can abate once the deficiency is resolved. Having a sulfur intolerance doesn't mean that your microbiome health cannot benefit from sulfur. Remember, you can't live without it. So if you begin with a very low dose and move up gradually in your dosing of the GI Janelle 1 powder, you can eventually tolerate a therapeutic level and rebalance your microbiome health. I've seen this hundreds of times. Sulfur does not directly affect the transsulfuration or the sulfide oxidase pathways, the two main sulfur pathways in your body. Where some people have been diagnosed with the CBS or the sulfox enzyme pathway SNPs or single nucleotide polymorphism, sulfur, taking MSM sulfur cannot directly impact those SNPs, and I'll tell you why. The beginning of all of those pathways requires methionine, and methionine is an essential amino acid. That means you can take all of the sulfur or all of the MSM you want, and you cannot convert it to methionine. Therefore, you cannot impact those pathways because they require methionine as a first step. So regardless of how much sulfur you make available for your body, you're not going to impact a single nucleotide polymorphism or SNP in the CBS or the sulfoxidase pathway. Methionine is essential. We can't make it. So the slow titration of GI Janelle 1 powder with the addition of molybdenum and selenium as cofactors will support your sulfur metabolism, so eventually you can tolerate the therapeutic doses of sulfur in order to have a beneficial and permanent impact on your gas and bloating symptoms, which are a result of a sulfur deficiency, which your body might be trying to upregulate by using the bacteria in your gut that are the sulfate-reducing bacteria in order to make hydrogen sulfide. Now, this is really interesting, right? Is the hydrogen sulfide increase for those that have been diagnosed with a hydrogen sulfide type of SIBO, is that a compensation by the body to try and get more sulfur in the body? Well, I ran across a study the other day that showed that giving certain species, these were chicken, giving certain chicken, poultry species MSM sulfur not only increased all of the growth parameters, but it lowered the hydrogen sulfide production in these species. They measured the hydrogen sulfide gas and found that the more MSM you gave these chicken species, the less hydrogen sulfide they made, which is in line with what I'm trying to say right here. Dr. Stephanie Seneff, MIT researcher, says that sulfur is the most common nutritional deficiency that you've never heard of. And this sulfur deficiency explains part of that sulfur intolerance, right? So as we have these hydrogen sulfide sulfite-reducing bacteria upregulated to replenish our sulfite deficiency, if we give ourselves that sulfur, we're going to get a shift in the microbiome because we don't need those sulfate-reducing bacteria anymore. So our body can shift and get rid of those and make a healthier microbiome as you've replaced that deficiency. Now you're no longer having excessive gas produced by the sulfate-reducing bacteria. And also, as an upstream effect, you can get rid of methane and hydrogen-dominant SIBO-type symptoms. I've seen this over and over again with people that come in with their SIBO tests. They might be methane dominant, they might be hydrogen dominant, they might be hydrogen sulfide dominant. We go through this process of replacing the sulfate deficiency, which is an upstream problem, and all the downstream problems get better based on subsequent testing. And also based on the fact if you're using one of the handheld devices to test your breath gases, you might notice, and I've seen this before too, that people consistently release methane gas in their handheld device. We know that 30 to 50% of healthy people that have no SIBO symptoms and no gastrointestinal symptoms release methane on a regular basis. So that's not a direct correlation between your symptoms. So keep that in mind if you're using one of those devices. We're going to move on in part 8 to talk about the food sources of sulfur.